pleasure to welcome you to this preview talk. I'm going to start off by introducing our three panelists, and also I'll briefly mention the third writer in this triad who's not here today, which is K.W. Jeter. All three of these writers went to Cal State Fullerton in the 1970s. Jeter graduated in '73 in sociology. I guess he was in a different department than Tim and James. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, he has written novels set in Star Trek universe, and Jeter has also done a number of follow-up sequels to Blade Runner. He is also the guy who gets credit for coining the term steampunk, and we'll probably talk more about that in a little bit. There's a letter that he wrote to Locus magazine, and we have a kind of copy version of that in the gallery on one of the text panels. He wrote that in 1987, and I guess it was the first time that term was used. And Jeter's first novels were Murloc Night and Infernal Devices, and Jeter was the inspiration for the Philip K. Dick character Kevin in Valis, and we'll probably be talking about Philip K. Dick tonight too, because it was another kind of intersection for our three writers here. Jeter also wrote early cyberpunk, and he was, like I said, friends with Philip K. Dick, and we'll talk about that later. James Blaylock, to my left, to your left, this is James Blaylock. He's got his degrees in '72 and '74 respectively, both in English. He got a master's in English in 1974. Another thing we'll probably talk about tonight is, along with Tim Powers, he invented the poet William Ashbliss. And we'll talk more about that and how he grew up here at Cal State Fullerton too, and what became of him. And actually, James and Tim have both collaborated on a number of books and published a number of books under that pseudonym. Blaylock is currently the director of the Creative Writing Conservatory at the Orange County High School of the Arts, and where Tim Powers is also a resident, and James is also a professor at Chapman University. He has won 2 World Fantasy Awards, one in 1997 and one in 1986. Another point of interest for illustrators, he's worked with the illustrator J.K. Potter on several books, and some of you may be familiar with him. Tim Powers got his degree in 1976, BA in English from Cal State Fullerton. He has won World Fantasy Award twice for his critically acclaimed novels Last Call and Declare. And in 1988, 98? Was it 98? I guess it was 98. It says 88 here, but I think it's a typo. His book On Stranger Tides was optioned for adoption for the 4th segment in the Pirates of the Caribbean. Another friend of Philip K. Dick's, the character David in the novel Valis was named after, or was based on Powers, I should say. And also, the Blade Runner was dedicated to Tim and his wife Serena. Powers, or Philip K. Dick dedicated it to him. Powers' first book was The Drawing of Dark in 1979, and then his second book, The Ambuscades, which is illustrated by us, by our department here, was a publication that won him great acclaim, including he won the Philip K. Dick Award for that particular book. In addition to being a resident at the Orange County High School for the Arts, he's also taught at the University of Redlands. Cliff Cramp is also an alum of Cal State Fullerton. And Cliff originated the idea, and I'm going to ask him in a minute to talk to us a little bit about that, but he first came to me, I guess it was about 2 years ago now, and said, Mike, what about this idea, this term was kind of coined here by Cal State Fullerton alums, and it's become this cultural phenomena. You know, what if we do an exhibition, and it kind of took off and had a life of its own from there. Originally we were going to and considered putting this exhibition at the Grand Central Arts Center, but for a host of reasons we wound up kind of changing the focus of the exhibition and ultimately moving it here to campus. Cliff has worked extensively in the entertainment industry, including background paintings for animation, storyboard, and visual development for feature films, CD, DVD cover art, board games, editorial, and book illustrations. And two of Cliff's recent clients are Lucasfilms. He recently did the cover for the complete saga of Star Wars on Blu-ray. He also recently did the cover art for the Plain White T's new album or audio production. And Cliff has worked with Lucasfilms, 20th Century Fox, United Artists, Hollywood Records, Nickelodeon TV, Animation, Disney Entertainment, Penguin Books, Ingram and White. The list goes on, but there's a short abbreviated version of that list. Just again, an overview of this exhibition. Basically what we've done here is we've taken 3 of the books for which the term steampunk was originally identified, and Cliff has worked with alums, students, and faculty in the illustration area, and they've illustrated those books. So Cliff, you want to start off by telling us a little bit about how this idea came about?
Sure. Our illustration program has a very large emphasis on story. And so visual storytelling is very, very important in our program. So oftentimes we choose books to illustrate. And in a particular lecture, as I was lecturing on genres and the aesthetics in these genres, and I was talking about cyberpunk, and then I soon moved to steampunk. And now I have a certain fascination for steampunk. I just love the genre. And so got a little excited. We were talking about the aesthetic. And one of my grad students raised his hand and he said, hey Cliff, do you realize steampunk has a connection to Cal State Fullerton? And I had no idea. I'm a Cal State Fullerton alum. I love the genre and I had no idea that there was a connection. So, and that grad student is named Quentin Bauer. He actually has a couple pieces in the show for Infernal Devices. Said, let's look it up. So we typed it in, benefit of a smart classroom, and we read right there during the lecture about steampunk, the connection. We went to their Wikipedia pages, Powers, Blaylock, and Jeter, and so that's how kind of the ball started rolling. And I had approached Mike, and we thought, well, why don't we do a show of Fullerton illustrators that celebrate Fullerton authors? And basically, it's gone through a variety of forms, but then we narrowed it back down to that same thing, Fullerton illustrators celebrating Fullerton authors. So we asked freshmen all the way through professionals that graduated way back when I graduated to participate in the venue. And I think it's been a success, which you'll see later.
Yeah, I'll just say, specifically, when Cliff approached us with the idea, we thought, well, that's great, and we began to look at the literature, and we realized there wasn't any encyclopedic examination of steampunk been published yet, and we started to do that, and as we were in that process, there was a show a couple years ago in London about steampunk, and we had contacted the people who organized it, and had asked them, are you going to do a publication? They said, no, we really hadn't thought about it. And I don't know if that call, kind of set the spark, but in any event, as we began to contact people about the project, we quickly discovered that they had changed their minds and they were already going to do an encyclopedic book, and since they'd already done all this research and legwork, it didn't seem like an appropriate approach for us. So we scaled it back to the original idea, which was going to be a component of the overall project. And so now we've done this, and we're also going to do a book that will have all of the illustrations in it and writings by Powers and Blaylock, and we'll also have some other written text in there, and one of James Blaylock's stories is going to be published in that book too, and that we want to get our installation shots for that, so that book will come out probably in a couple months after once the show's closed and everything. So James and Tim, how did you guys get started writing this kind of fiction? I know you've both written other kinds of fiction, but I'm just curious as to how the three of you went down this path, or how did it all start?
Well, the three of us didn't collaborate on the idea that we would all write pseudo-Victorian science fiction. I was reading a lot of Robert Louis Stevenson at the time, and I'm a crazy Stevenson fan. And I was really nuts for The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and a couple of other books. And I was also reading a lot of P.G. Wodehouse, who was, of course, not a Victorian, but he came along just a little bit later. He lived to be almost 100 years old, so heaven knows that there was an era that he didn't live through. So I thought that since my head was all full of these two writers, I thought, gee whiz, I'd like to write a piece that I'd like to just sort of hang around in that era and see if I could write something that would be that would have the sensibilities that I might have had if, in fact, I was writing in 1875. And what came of that was a very strange short story called The 8-Box Affair, which I sold to Unearth magazine for $40. And it was published in 1978, I believe. I wrote it in 77, it was published in 78. That was my first sojourn into that genre.
Also, the 8-Box Affair was exactly steampunk.
Yeah.
Involved Victorian era attempt to fire a spacecraft in orbit.
Had an orangutan.
With an orangutan. And there was a box that was somehow supposed to produce oxygen for the ape, and there was another box that contained...
It was another box that was an aerator that contained powdered chlorophyll, and if anybody... One of the reasons I like to write about that era is that science was entirely made up at the time, which is the only science that I understand. It's a science that I can make up, so I thought, sure. Yeah, so there was a box with a toy in it, and there was a box with an aerator in it, and you'd wind it up, and it would puff out green chlorophyll, and I don't know.
And of course these boxes got mixed up, like Stevenson's The Wrong Box.
Very much like Stevenson's Wrong Box. And the orangutan grabbed one and ran off through London, and
Somebody looked in the chlorophyll one and his face was turned
the
green.
Lord Mayor, I figured I'd make a politician.
So it was perfect steampunk.
How did that letter come about? What did you guys think of that letter when it came out, and what was that all about? The letter
As
to
I
Lotus.
recall, the point of Jeter's letter was to say that he was there first, writing
Right.
science fiction in a Victorian setting. He was saying, my Morlock Night was 1979, and Powers didn't come along until 83, and although you beat him with the
I did.
8-Box Affair.
Yeah,
It would be,
forgot about that. His was the first novel.
yeah. And so he was sort of planting a flag by having the letter published in Locus Magazine, which is the one news place for the whole science fiction fantasy world. And then fortunately, cyberpunk was hot at the time, and he said, maybe we should think of some term to describe this stuff that me and Powers and Blaylock are writing. Maybe steampunk, based on steam machinery and whatnot. And it's fortunate for certainly Blaylock and Jeter and I that he did come up with that term, because it was a perfect term to hang a whole bunch of stuff on. I think a lot of times a sort of phenomenon can go by unnoticed if it doesn't get the right two-syllable word for people to staple onto it.
Yeah, it makes it easy for critics and reviewers to
Yeah.
launch pieces, because they've got the jargon.
Did you guys discuss it at all before he did that, or no?
I
Just
think it
something
came off
he
the
did?
top of his.
I don't think he thought about it for 5 minutes before.
He was pretty quick that way.
So what do you guys think of all this? I mean, that's come out of this. I mean, you must have some like opinion of it, or I mean,
I find it phenomenally cool, actually. Although it isn't as if when you're walking down the street, people recognize you, which is good, I suppose. I don't think I'd be happy if people did. And I'm not, I think you fall in the same category. I don't quite have enough guts to wear the costume, but I absolutely love the stuff. And in fact, that's what drew me to Victorian London in the first place. It was just a colorful, really colorful era. And the thing that makes me happiest about it is that there's spin-offs into architecture and interior design and fashion and jewelry and all kinds
music
of stuff.
and
Music, yeah.
and
Music.
of course movies. And at what point did you guys become aware that was happening? And
Late, probably.
I actually got an invitation from the University of Bologna in 1991. The Department of Utopian and Dystopian Studies at the University of Bologna.
Imagine their faculty lounge.
Yeah. They were heavily into steampunk, and in fact, they were putting on a weekend-long program, and in one day featured my work, which I thought was interesting. They saw it as revisionist history, and anytime somebody throws out a 10-cent word like that, I guess that's what it is.
Yes.
It amused me that it was history revised by a guy who grew up in Anaheim, in terms of where I grew up. Tim was way over in La Mirada.
Jeter was local too.
Yeah, who had my entire idea of the history I got from Charles Dickens, basically. And so it was Charles Dickens, which is historical, I guess, to a degree, filtered through my mind and then screwed up with Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, and this thing came out of it that I didn't actually see as any more historical on any level than The Man in the Moon. But I was happy to go to Bologna to speak. They were going to send me, I believe at the time, 100 million lira or something like that. Yeah, and it turned out to be $49. And so at the time, we couldn't afford to go to Italy, so I missed it. But that was the first time, '91, that I realized it was kind of a big deal in Europe.
When was it we went to France and they were all over it?
2004?
Yeah.
you know that Calvino taught at the University of Bologna.
Sure, yeah, Umberto Eco.
Yeah.
Yeah, I figured I'd run into him there. Tap me in the head.
Yeah, I think all of us were working on a kind of largely imaginary London.
Yeah.
I think mine came largely by way of Fritz Leiber's Lankmar. If there anyone who's read Fritz Leiber? Good. When I would read Dickens, there would kind of be a transparent overlay of Lankmar, which is another fictional, in this case, city. Smoke, narrow alleys, mysterious windows, bridges, tunnels, cellars. And yeah, it's something about the gadgets in Victorian London. Anything that's like brass and got calibrations and lenses, you think, oh cool, what does that do? It might be a way to measure where you are by looking at the stars, or it might be something to make coffee, but it's intrinsically cool. In fact, I admire the way they could not make like a screwdriver or a level without putting all those little leaves and curlicues all over. It must have been a kind of gracious thing to be a mechanic in those days. Hand me the thing with the fleur-de-lis. No, not that. The Beardsley woman on it. And I don't think we really went far wrong by dealing in ignorance.
No,
K.W. Jeter did find a gorgeous source book, the source book for Victorian London, which is Henry Mayhew's London Labour and London Poor, which it's boiled down to 2 volumes that are in print now, which are still bigger than 2 Bibles. And it describes every way of making a living among poor people in London. Weird stuff you'd never imagine. Stranger than you could ever make up if you were trying to be weird. Some of them legal, some of them illegal, but all strikingly bizarre. I mean, you read 10 pages of this and you think, wow, you know, I've got the ingredients of a novel here. I just got to connect the dots. Yeah, I wouldn't admit this if I thought it was going to go any further, but really with Mayhew's books, tear out 20 pages and you've got the makings of a novel, and then if you want a sequel, tear out the next 20 pages.
Well, while we're on the subject of talking about the novels, we talk about those in a little bit more detail. First of all, I got to say, the first time I met with James, I said to him, how do you write so much? I mean, I didn't list the books, both of these guys, they write so many books. I mean, they're just incredibly prolific. But what's the start? And maybe we can start with Annabeth Gates. Tim, where do you start with that? What's the beginning, the genesis for that? And how do you come upon something that complex and full of details? And
Well, actually, it's relatively easy. What my system is I'll find some period of history, say, or historical character or place that seems intrinsically interesting, seems likely to be a good hook to hang a book on. And then I simply read everything I can get my hands on concerning it. Journals of the time, histories, biographies, newspapers if I can get them, get maps of, say, London in this case, of the time. And if you read all this stuff with this sort of honorarily paranoid schizophrenic squint, where you're simply looking for weird stuff, and if you constantly have in mind 2 things. A, nothing is a coincidence. If Einstein did something on the same day in Germany that Charlie Chaplin did something in Hollywood, it's not a coincidence. And the second principle is, what were they up to really? Like history will say, well, he did this because his wife had just died and he needed to go to the funeral. I think, no, why did he really do it? And at that point, after you've read enough of this stuff and you've picked up 30 or 40 things that are too cool not to use, obviously you've got 30 or 40 pieces of your eventual book. They're too cool not to use, so obviously they'll be in there. And the challenge is simply to connect the dots. And so I never, for example, get a story and then decide to research it. I do the research in order to find the makings of the story. Really, my system is ideal for someone with no intrinsic imagination.
what about you, James?
well, the first thing I'll say is that the process that he just described, which sounded very simple, I think it takes him about a year before he actually starts to write.
Yeah, that's true.
And I just can't put in that kind of labor. And so mine is actually the flip side of that. I just make crap up. One time, in fact, speaking of Phil Dick, Tim and I were hanging around with Phil Dick one night, and he informed us in a really valid way.
It was terrifying.
That the KGB in Russia had come up with a madness ray. And it's just a bit like a big spotlight, and they open it up and they shine it straight through the earth because it's impervious to the horizon. It'll just go straight through the earth. And right now he convinced us it was aimed at Los Angeles. And any moment they were going to turn it on, and every one of us would be out dancing in the streets and hooting and carrying on. And so I was petrified for 2 or 3 days until I saw Phil again. He started laughing at us.
Oh, I thought you were going to tell me it really happened.
Well, so for one of my steampunk novels, I thought, okay, there's a madness ray. I just borrowed it from Phil and gave it to my villain. And then I scouted around for likely locations, figured out why it had to be there, and I put together a sort of very suspense plot as to science fiction novels. And I tried to make it as plausible as I could, and it's, I don't know.
Well, so you just make it up, but based on having read a million
Well, yeah.
Dickenses and Stevensons and Mayhew.
True. And also it's, I have a great love of the language of the period, and although I'm not sure that I would say that I sound like a Victorian, certainly I don't sound like Dickens, and I'm not sure that, that I necessarily want to, but I try to make the language work well enough so that it's authentic in that sense.
Yeah, you don't accidentally want to say groovy or something.
No. Or have somebody say, hey, dude.
Yeah, yeah. That's a
Speaking,
dead giveaway.
speaking of Philip K. Dick, let's change gears a little bit. Get it? Gears? Oh, I'm sorry. And, and talk a little bit about Cal State Fullerton in the 70s, which is, of course, that's where you met Philip K. Dick. But first of all, I'm just curious, what's your impression of the changes on the campus? I mean, obviously things have changed a lot.
I managed to find a corner I recognized. I could stand sort of by what I think is still the Humanities Building and what may still be the library. And if I don't swivel too much, I think, yeah, I know where I am. But if I turn around, I don't.
I taught here in the late 70s and early 80s, and even by then it had added 1,000 or 10,000 students and 2 or 3 buildings. When I started here, it was 14,000 students, 21,000 when I graduated, and what are there now? 40?
Not quite. I think we're 37 or 36 right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was just telling the two of them what we have. Maybe a lot of you know this, but Cal State Fullerton's going to take over Nutwood and expand the campus and increase to 60 or 1,000 students or so at some point in the near future. While you were here, there were a number of professors that you worked with, including Dorothea Kenny, Willis McNally, and Jane Hippolito. You want to talk a little bit about your experiences with those folks?
I think the most crucial teacher we had here was Dorothea Kenny. She was a little Irish lady and very Irish. I mean, she could pronounce the word Protestant and peel paint off a wall. But she was a complete, total expert in all world mythology, especially Celtic. And she, if she decided you were an interesting student, she would just latch on and make you work and not take bad work from you and make you do it over again. And she hosted a kind of would-be writers gathering at her house about once a month with beer and pizza, and we would always go over there for the beer and pizza. And she really was a huge encouragement for me and Blaylock and Jeter and others too. Always with the attitude that you pursue this, you get it published, you get it right, you make it better. This is good but not adequate. Work on it some more. And I'm not confident that any of the three of us would be published yet if it hadn't been for her pitchfork in the back.
So even though Jeter was a sociology major, he took classes from her.
Well, I don't know if he took classes with her, but he was always at the monthly writing thing.
He actually was always hanging around the English department and taking English classes. He was a sociology major, but only barely.
Yeah, very.
He knew where, the cool kids hung out. Actually, when I first ran into Dr. Kenny, I had the idea that I was a good enough writer so that I could write any damn thing and get an A on a paper. And
Mostly you could. Mostly you could.
yeah, that was, and then I turned in my first paper to her, and there was more red ink on that paper when she gave it back than I thought could exist in any given pen. Insulting things written in the margin, and a C on the top of it, which was not the grade that I wanted in the class. and a note at the bottom saying, "You appear to think you're a creative writer." And she said, come to the Fullerton Poetry Society meeting. So then I did, and we became great good friends, and I started writing papers that she didn't have to insult. So yeah, it was very, it was a good experience.
What about Will McNally?
Will McNally taught science fiction class, and when I took his class, I think I was 20 years old, something like that. And I
was just thinking about this. I think he was probably the age that you two guys are right now when you took classes from him.
Actually, that's probably true.
Because he was born in 1920, so.
That's too weird.
Yeah, anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean to blow your mind with that.
But I had grown up reading H.G. Wells and Jules Verne and Edgar Rice Burroughs and other writers of very early science fiction. I had no concept of science fiction as a genre, contemporary genre. And so I signed up for the class because it was the 60s or 70s, and God knows I didn't want to have to study anything vital. And Will McNally gave me a list of what had to have been the dozen greatest science fiction novels at the time. And I read them all and thought, holy smoke, what have I been missing all these years, But then I maintained my love for Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, too, despite that.
Yeah, I think we should maybe say something about McNally. He was originally a Shakespearean scholar, a Chaucer scholar, Eliot scholar, and as I understand it, he was one of the first scholars to really embrace science fiction writing and suggest that it was a legitimate form of literature.
That's true. In fact, he and Jane Hippolito edited a book called, I think, Mars, We Love You.
It was a good anthology.
Yeah, which was a real good anthology of stories, and also presented by and for literary scholars. And yeah, they were among the first, if not the first, among academic circles to say, this is not just bubblegum Buck Rogers kid stuff crap. There's actually good writing going on in this jungle.
And it must have been really impressive to you. Well, first of all, we should mention that both McNally and Dorothea Kenny have died in the last decade. Jane Hippolito's still alive. She is retired now and she lives in Fullerton. But it must have been amazing for you guys not only to be studying with these people, then to find out that they knew science fiction writers like Phil K. Dick and Frank Herbert. And
yeah, in fact, it was, of course, through McNally that everybody met Phil Dick. Phil Dick had his house in Northern California spectacularly broken into, blown up, just about a science fiction story altogether. I won't try to outline it, but he fled to Canada, broke, homeless, his house was virtually gone, and wrote to McNally and said, I got nowhere to go. I have nowhere to live. And McNally read the letter to class, and two of the girls in the class said, we just lost a roommate. Why didn't you come in and be a roommate? And McNally relayed that, and Phil was so desperate, he just got, okay, and got on an airplane. And I knew the two girls, and they said, you want to go to the airport and pick up Philip K. Dick? He's going to sleep on our couch. And luckily I had not read much Philip K. Dick, or I wouldn't have been able to speak to him. Anytime I meet writers I admire, all I can do is spit and stammer and sweat. But he moved down here, spoke several times at Cal State Fullerton, deposited a lot of his papers and book collection with the library, and
as did Frank Herbert, by the way.
Yeah.
Frank Herbert wrote Dune.
boy, they all knew that.
Right, of course. They might not know that McNally wrote the accompaniment to Dune.
Well, that's right, the Dune
The
Encyclopedia.
Dune Encyclopedia, yeah, McNally wrote that.
So Phil Dick really never moved very far away after that for the rest of his life. He was living in Fullerton, just a few blocks south of here. Got married, eventually moved to Santa Ana, and died there in '82. But
And when does Blade Runner come out?
82.
82.
Yeah.
So
Phil died a few months before the movie came out.
But my understanding, you guys developed a relationship with Phil Dick, and
Yeah, when he came down, it was 1972, and I met him because I knew the girls he was supposed to sleep on the couch of. And so very quickly, he knew Blaylock and Jeter, and we all just sort of hung out and wasted time and drank beers and talked and that kind of thing for 10 years.
You would go to O'Hara's in
O'Hara's
Orange.
Pub at the Orange Circle, yeah. I don't think Blaylock or Jeter or I very often showed Phil things we'd written.
No, the first piece I showed him was when I finished my first novel in 1980, I guess, or 79. I showed it to him, and he wrote a really gorgeous cover blurb. It was about a page long, which I was impressed by. And it's been excerpted and put on all of my novels since, as if Phil did, has been dead for 20 years now. Is still 20 years? Is it 20 years? Or is it
It's more than that, it's
Well,
30
it's
now.
30 years. I don't even think about it. Yeah, as if he's been supplying quotes from the books. But it was this gigantic letter. They just fall out new stuff,
So the two of you then subsequently began reading what his writings.
Yeah,
had.
very, very quickly. And I know I was catching on immediately, reading things like Dr. Blood Money, Martian Time Slip, Maze of Death. I caught on sort of, like, Jesus. This is the only genuine genius I'm probably ever going to know. But luckily, it was kind of segmented and over a period of time, so it didn't render me unable to speak.
And while you were students here, the two of you developed William Ashbliss. How did that happen, and what was the genesis of that, and where did that lead you to?
Well, you have to understand that we were students here in the late 60s and early 70s when there was an idea abroad that it was good just to be layabout losers more than anything else. So on occasion, we skipped a class and
On occasion.
and hung out in the student union eating breakfast. One day, I don't know what happened.
Well, the Daily Titan published poetry, and it was still close enough to 1969 that the poetry was all free verse about sunshine and flowers and children playing on the beach and contemptible stuff like that. And we figured we could write stuff that would seem much more portentous,
But be much even worse.
but be worse, be without meaning. And so we never went to classes. I would write a line of a poem and pass it to Blaylock. He'd write a line, pass it back, I'd write a line. And we'd pass it back and forth this way till we began to get to the end, and then you'd say, uh-oh, here's the bottom of the page. And you'd bring it to some sort of Wagnerian climax. We typed them up and sent them to the Daily Titan. We used your phone number as a contact number.
And the deal was that Ashbliss was a Cal State Fullerton student,
That's right.
but was so monumentally wrecked, just
Deformed.
physically deformed.
A lot of
He
deformities.
couldn't go out in public, so he sent Tim and I around to do his bidding. He would write the poetry and we'd take it to the Daily Titan. And so the Titan had my telephone number, thought it was that Ashbliss lived at the house where that number was, where that phone would ring.
He was so messed up, he probably had to live in an aquarium.
And they called one night, in fact, to get I said some of the strangest things over the telephone, not wanting to give away the fact that I was in fact sane. I thought I was sane.
So they published it gratefully.
Several times.
And then he became a character in some of your books.
Well, they published him, and then so we sent him another lot that was stupider, and they published that. And we sent him a third lot that was stupider still, and they did not publish that.
It was sort of the straw, I think, that broke the camel's back.
But some great individual line by line. There was some great stuff. I remember, heavy on my brow sits the cold dog of the snows.
Yeah. Very nearly Shakespearean.
But then, when Blaylock and I began to write novels, very often it would be necessary to have a character who was kind of a crazy white bearded poet. And so independently, both Blaylock and I wrote novels with such a poet named William Ashbless, and both sent them to,
The same editor, actually.
she asked Blaylock, do you know this Powers guy? What's this Ashbless thing going on?
And I said, oh, yeah, that, he launched Ashbless in his novel before I started with Ashbless, so I'll change his name, I'll make him Joe Jones or something. And she said, no, I think it's the same guy. Powers' novel was set in, what, 1811?
Yeah.
And mine was 1958 or so in Los Angeles. And I thought, well, I guess they could be the same.
What the hell?
So then he's appeared a number of times, actually.
And in fact, a small press publisher has been ill-advisedly paying us to write books supposedly by Ashbless over the years. There's the William Ashbless Memorial Cookbook, and
There were a couple that were illustrated by Gay and Wilson.
yeah,
Which
yeah.
was pretty cool. In fact, there was you probably know more about this than I do, but there was an art show in Israel not too long ago
That's right.
by an artist who claimed to have been inspired by William Ashbless. This isn't a big,
Yeah.
in Tel Aviv, a big art gallery, and he liked the way the poetry could sort of be deconstructed and put back together, and it didn't hurt it any.
In fact, it's not only easy to deconstruct it, I don't think you can construct
As
it.
being essentially senseless, which is kind of our point in the first place. But he built these gigantic structures of chopped up tree limbs and blocks and things, and then every night he would come in and turn them into new structures, so if you went back the next day, you could
It was
see
the talk of Tel Aviv.
We're getting towards the end of our talk here, but maybe we should change topics to pirates and talk a little bit about pirates. Actually, on pirates, right, is a...
It was an Ashbless book. another
Right,
one.
and then we have, of course, the Pirates of the Caribbean, and Cliff actually is a big pirate fan himself. So I think this is bringing us back to, you want to talk about your pirate illustration game? Actually, there's is it on your website? There's a picture of you as a
Yeah.
pirate, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, I had done the illustrations for, fortunately, not unfortunately, but fortunately, I'd done the illustrations for a board game called The Pirate King. And they wanted one more comp done, so I didn't have anybody available except for me. So I did me, and that's the cover they chose. So that's the unfortunate. So I'm the cover of the Pirate King. So it's funny as you work through your illustration career. I've worked World War II genre, automotive. So every couple years, as the students filter through here, I was the pirate guy during one group of students, and the World War II guy in another group of students, and the automotive guy in another group of students, and currently I'm the steampunk guy in the current group of students. So.
Well, as a last topic, why don't we talk a little bit about character development? From an illustrator, Cliff, how do you approach developing your characters, and what makes you decide what that character is going to look like if it's not yourself?
Well, a lot of it is, I have little jingles that I use with the students, light side, dark side, warm side, cool side, when I'm talking about their lighting and things like that. And one of the things that I try to enforce in them is when in doubt, act it out. Really, they have to become actors, because that's what we're doing. The subtlety of somebody that is coy versus somebody that is shy is very minimal, and you really have to be able to communicate those things, because as illustrators, we're visual communicators, and you have to get that message across. It's vitally important. Your audience can't wonder what you're saying. They have to understand it. So as far as character goes, and it was a lot of fun doing the books, a lot of rich characters in the 3 books that we were able to illustrate for this show. But a lot of it is getting into that character, acting it out, the subtleties of motion, the subtleties of character, Gesture is vitally important. At times I haven't done this recently, but I used to bring in costume models, and we would have the models act, and we would sketch from them. It's something that we do intermittently, but I haven't done it in a couple of years.
So Tim and James, I'm just curious, how do you guys develop your characters? I mean, what's your process? Where do those characters in your books come from?
Oh, to an extent, you can take a couple of people you know and like laminate them together into one, because at least you have the advantage of knowing how those people react when they're angry, scared, grouchy, tired, drunk, as opposed to just some sort of paper cutout. Ideally, the events of the plot will make them stop being simply a laminate of two people you know, but that's usually a good way to start.
Yeah, I think I do the same thing. I think I borrow from people I know. I try not to, cast anybody in a bad light. If you laminate, though, they turn out to have become a sort of a third thing.
Yeah,
I don't think
yeah.
they become recognizable at that point. That's where my best characters come from.